Good morning. This hearing will come to order. I want to welcome everyone and thank my ranking member, Senator Sessions, and all of our colleagues who are joining us for this hearing today. A special thank you to Sylvia Burwell, who is the Director of the Office of Management and Budget. It's been nearly a year ago that you were before this committee for your confirmation for your nomination. You've been doing a great job since then during some pretty tough times, and I really am pleased that you're able to join us here today. In a short few months, we had a government shutdown in October, followed by the two-year budget deal in December, and the fiscal year 2014 appropriations process wasn't finished until January. So the President's budget proposal is understandably a few weeks later than you would have hoped, but one of the many benefits of the two-year budget deal is that we have agreement on a bipartisan spending level for 2015. That will enable Congress and the administration to complete our appropriations work on a timely basis this year. We are going to be discussing the President's 2015 budget proposal today, but I want to take a minute or two to talk about how we got here and what we can do to build on what we have done. For far too long, Congress has been lurching from one budget crisis to the next, hurting families, devastating our economy, and eroding the trust of the American people in our government. But at the end of last year, Chairman Ryan and I finally sat down to negotiate in a budget conference. We both knew we were not going to get everything we wanted. We also knew the country was looking to us to make some compromises and to show that government could function and that our democracy could work. So working closely with many of our colleagues here on the Budget Committee, we got to work and put our ideas on the table, made some very tough compromises, focused on what was attainable, put partisanship aside, and we did reach a deal. Our bipartisan two-year budget passed with overwhelming support in the Senate and House and was signed into law by President Obama in December. It rolled back some of the most damaging cuts from sequestration. It prevented government shutdowns in January and October of this year. It set spending levels for fiscal year 2014, and critically, because it was a two-year deal, it set budget levels for fiscal year 2015, which now allows our appropriations committees to get to work with a bipartisan spending level. That gives our families and our communities across the country the budget certainty that they deserve. I give Chairman Ryan a lot of credit for his work on our two-year budget, along with many Republicans and Democrats who worked with us and supported it. Nobody thinks our two-year budget deal was perfect. It was a compromise. And nobody thinks it was the end of the story. Of course it's not. I hope we can work together now to build on that two-year budget deal and not relitigate it. Let's take the opportunity we have here in Congress, finally freed from the manufactured crises, and invest in jobs and broad-based economic growth and opportunities for our families and communities. There has been $3.3 trillion of deficit reduction done over the last few years, and it is more than $4 trillion if you include all the savings from sequestration. Our deficit is on the path to shrink by about a third of what it was 5 years ago. And while we absolutely need to tackle our long-term deficit and debt challenges fairly and responsibly, we now have some breathing room to focus on the other deficits that face our country. Our deficit in jobs, our deficits in innovation and infrastructure and education. And that's why I'm very glad that we are here today to discuss the President's budget proposal that would build on our bipartisan two-year budget in exactly this way. One important way that this budget proposal would build on our two-year budget deal is through the Opportunity, Growth, and Security Initiative that would further invest in priorities like manufacturing and research and development, military readiness, education, and job training. The initiative would invest equally in defense and non-defense priorities and fully offset the cost of these additional investments in a balanced and responsible way, very much in the spirit of our bipartisan budget deal. Like every proposal in the President's budget, we would need a bipartisan agreement to build on this two-year budget that we have in place now, and that will guide the work of the Appropriations Committee this year. I truly hope Republicans are willing to join us at the table once again to talk about this critical work of investing in jobs and our security in a balanced and fiscally responsible way. I want to briefly mention just a few of the many strong proposals in the President's budget that I'm hoping to hear more about today. I was very glad to see that this budget maintains the commitment to a national preschool initiative. Expanding preschool would not only help our youngest children and pay dividends in future economic growth, it would empower millions of women who would be able to go to work and give back to their communities. I'm also pleased to see this budget proposal would invest in a skilled health care workforce with clinical training for community health programs. It would strengthen the National Service Corps and increase the number of medical residents for primary care, among other initiatives. This is an important step to ensure that our families across the country get the care they need, and it's not something that should get strong bipartisan support. I'm also very glad to see the budget calls for a reform of the Earned Income Tax Credit for childless workers. The EITC lifts millions of low-income working families out of poverty each year, but it's currently leaving individuals without children behind. Boosting the credit for this segment of the population would further incentivize work and increase economic opportunity for more Americans. The President's budget also includes a plan to reauthorize our surface transportation programs for 4 years. It would boost infrastructure funding and would address the expected shortfalls in the Highway Trust Fund, which would allow for much-needed investments in our aging infrastructure to help our commuters and our businesses and create jobs for countless Americans. The budget proposal pays for these investments with the temporary revenue boost that would come during the transition to a fairer and more competitive corporate tax system. This is a fiscally responsible approach to corporate tax reform, and Chairman Camp included a similar proposal to shore up the Highway Trust Fund in the tax reform plan that he released last week. So I think Congress should take a close look at that. On the individual side of the tax code, the President's budget would generate revenue for deficit reduction by eliminating hundreds of billions of dollars in backdoor spending that benefits the wealthiest individuals who need it the least. These reforms would increase the efficiency of our tax system and make our tax code fairer to middle-class families. Very glad the President has taken a balanced approach with this budget proposal. This is the approach that the vast majority of the American people support. It is fiscally responsible, and it is the right thing to do. Our tax code is riddled with wasteful loopholes and special interest carve-outs. It would be unfair and unacceptable to ignore every last one of them while calling on seniors and families to bear the burden of deficit reduction alone. The budget also capitalizes on the savings from declining health care costs. In the past few years, health care costs have grown more slowly than at any other time period since the mid-1960s. I'm glad the President's proposal builds on the savings from this decline. The President's proposal also upholds immigration reform as a way to tackle our long-term deficits. In July of last year, the Congressional Budget Office found that immigration reform would significantly reduce the deficit over the next 20 years and expand the labor force. Passing comprehensive immigration reform is the right thing to do for our families, for our economy, and for the long-term budget outlook. Finally, I want to note the President's budget this year does not include chain CPI. That is a proposal that's been pushed by Republicans that was included as a compromise offer in his budget last year. I personally believe there are better ways to create jobs, grow the economy, and tackle our long-term fiscal challenges than this policy. I'm glad it was not included this year. The President's budget is a strong proposal for a long-term plan to build on our 2-year budget deal, create jobs and broad-based growth, and expand opportunities for families and communities across the country. Congress proved in December that when we work together on a budget, we can invest in our priorities and reduce the deficit. I'm hoping that everyone will join us again to continue that work.